Hey, my name is Michael. Today I'm going to be affirming the resolution. Nice to meet you, by the way. Hope you can introduce yourself in a second. But I'm going to be affirming the resolution today that Trump's response to the protesters in Charlottesville was not strong enough. Now, in this debate round, we could have another debate round about, well, Trump is good or Trump is bad. And, we could get into the politics of white supremacists versus Antifa and insult our president all day back and forth. Instead, though, we're going to be focusing less on the political positions that Trump has taken and more on the actual strength of his response. The resolution today is not Trump was right about Charlottesville. The resolution asks us to measure the strength of his response. So in light of that, I want to offer a point of analysis on what the resolution actually means when it says strong enough. Now, strong enough indicates worth on a scale. The question today is not, was Trump's response to Charlottesville, meaning the riots that took place in Charlottesville, strong, but how strong was his response, and is that response, quote unquote, enough? So in order to adequately answer this, though, we need a standard to help us measure what does constitute how strong something needs to be in order for it to be strong enough. Then we can have a debate about whether or not his response meets that standard. The standard I want to offer today is that of presidential responsibility. And what I mean by that is specifically in the context of this resolution, presidents have a responsibility to respond to national crises in a timely, precise, and consistent manner. So if you're taking notes or you want to remember those things, in other words, if his response is timely, precise, and consistent, it's a strong response. If it is not all three of those things, it's a very weak response. So in this debate, if I can show that Trump didn't do these things in his response, then we can know that his response wasn't a strong one and I should win the round. After analyzing that, I'm going to offer a couple different reasons for why I think his response fails to meet these criteria. The first one is the timeliness aspect of it. Now, first of all, it took Trump 2 whole days to say anything about the Charlottesville riots. We have white supremacists rioting and killing people, millions of people talking about it, and the president has absolutely nothing to say on it for 48 whole hours. This is further exacerbated by the fact that this is coming from the dude who tweets responses to current events within minutes of them happening, and yet Trump wouldn't say anything for 48 hours. We understand there's a huge time delay in his fault, which makes it look bad because people are like calling for the president to come out and say something. And so when it comes out and he actually does say something, it looks like he's only doing it because he was forced to. That leads me to the next point about how it was imprecise. His first statement, quote unquote, was there was violence on many sides, isn't even a strong condemnation of either group of people. It's about the vaguest and imprecise thing that you could possibly say. So by loosely indicting both sides, he's effectively not indicting either of them. He talks generally about hate and evil, but never once said racism or Nazi or white supremacist. And it led to a ton of confusion on the part of the public and ultimately was a strong response, a weak response.
Sorry, minor audio troubles at the moment. Hopefully that you can hear me. Now, I want to address our question for this debate on what we're trying to answer. One, we're not trying to ask the question, are white supremacists good or bad? Two, we're going to actually establish if what the president did was strong or not strong. And third, we're not going to make a judgment call on a specific person's ideology in this debate. This debate isn't are Nazis worse than not Nazis. I don't think that's a debate worth having. So to keep this question focused, my estimation is I do disagree that Trump was strong enough in response to the protest. Why? Because he did exactly what the law says that he must do. The president doesn't have the power to regulate political opinions. The president has the power to regulate and enforce the law. The law says violence or initiating violence against another individual is against the law. The motivation for such crime is irrelevant to the fact that it's a crime. Hate crimes versus regular crimes still end up in the same result. A crime was occurred, and the person that committed the crime must be punished. Who committed the crime is irrespective of the debate that we're supposed to be having. So in the purest sense, although Trump has done absolutely nothing right in his administration, I believe that this comment that he made was one of the only things that he's gotten right. Now, with the audio troubles, I do want to go back to Métante. Excuse me if I don't pronounce it right, because I do want you to quickly reestablish your initial point, only so I know that we're not talking past each other. Thanks, I'm passing the mic.
Yeah, my initial point about the framework of the debate, like the standard,
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So really quickly, the standard that I was offering was that of presidential responsibility. Specifically, I was saying that presidents have a responsibility to respond to crises in a manner that's timely, precise, and consistent. Do you understand that? And so the argument that I'm making is that the way that we determine if his response is strong enough is if it's timely, if it's precise, and if it's consistent. If it is not all three of those things, it's not a strong response, and it doesn't meet the requirements. So it would be a weak response. Are you understanding that?
I absolutely understand that. So I just object to one of the initial premises. So we are going to classify Charlottesville as a national emergency that deserves the entire country's attention, because I believe that there was one death and a bunch of fights that were occurring on the street of a city, right? That's worth a national emergency.
It's certainly a national crisis, and everybody called it a national crisis. So whether or not you want to say it was worth the response that it attracted, it became a national crisis due to the response that people made. Do you want to, if you wouldn't classify it as a national crisis, do you think that it was worth Trump responding to? What would you classify it as?
I would classify this incident as a crime between two gangs that were having a gang fight on the streets. We see similar types of incidents occurring on the streets on other cities that don't get enough as much attention, but had more deaths or more injuries. In fact, I can give in the same exact day, there was an analogous street fight in the suburbs of Chicago where 3 people were died, and 2 of them were under 18. So I was just curious, since I believe that the media did ask Trump to respond, I do believe that his response was appropriate, seeing the circumstance.
Okay, so your argument is that Charlottesville wasn't really worth Trump's time? It was just like every other death that happens. It was just like every other fight that happens, and he shouldn't have responded to it?
No, I believe it's an interesting event because there was a period of time where there was the ACLU tried to side with, I believe, the white supremacist side to create a legal rally for the past 2 months, and they won in court. That's an interesting result because it got so much attention. There was a built up protest, specifically agitators from Antifa, right? So they, knowing that there's going to be a bunch of white supremacists here once the court ruled in their favor. And I do think that there was how can you say, conspiracy to commit crimes, but nothing that demands a national. Nothing that Trump can do about it.
Okay, well, I mean, maybe we disagree on this point. That's fine. I would argue, and this is just an argument that I'm posing, that the nature of the coverage that it received nationally and the fact that there were so many people outraged about it merited calling it a national crisis. So even if you don't think that it was a big deal that it was the largest white supremacist gathering that we had in decades, and if you don't think it was a big deal that Antifa, that we had this huge group of people that came together and they clashed in the streets, the people in America certainly did. And so, if something doesn't matter to the American people, we would say it probably shouldn't matter to the president. But if it does matter to them, I would argue that it does in fact matter to the president.
So your argument is an ad populum fallacy, therefore makes it a valid point. I do not take the popular opinion to be that as a valid argument to may change the merits of it being true or false. In fact, that's the media covering it, right? This is like the same question I have with the constant Russian hack the DNC. Well, you can keep saying that there's an ad Veracrunian fallacy where we have these authorities that are saying it, but until you show me some evidence, the only evidence I see is from John McAfee, who actually released some reports. So at this point, I don't care that the media is recovering it. I don't care that people are outraged. That doesn't make anything more or less valid. People being outraged, actually, if anything, would be a test. Are you going to change? Are you going to go change your rule of law, or what your grounds of your scope and breadth of what you're supposed to be doing as president to enforce the law and go, you know what? Everyone hates these guys. I'm going to go out and do something which I don't think would be appropriate. Trump has no problem doing things that are inappropriate, which is why it's so surprising to me that he didn't do it. But in this case, he was right. Denounce crimes. Aggression is wrong, no matter who initiates it, period. Trump is the lead law enforcement, the lead executive, or who is in charge of enforcing the law that our national government creates. And all he did was reestablish what the law is and said anyone that breaks those laws, especially to harm another individual, is wrong. I agree.
Okay, we're gonna disagree here. That wasn't actually what he said. He didn't say anybody who breaks laws is, should not be supported or is bad. Okay, so your argument here is that, well, it was just a bunch of people committing crimes, just like happens in Chicago all of the time. I disagree. Planned activism and outright support for one of the historically most evil ideologies of all time, that is Nazism and white supremacy, is not something that is a crime, just like that happened, just like when a dude shoots another dude in Chicago because he robs a store. So for you to be like, oh yeah, Charlottesville wasn't a big deal, like if the audience wants to buy an argument that says, well, Charlottesville doesn't really matter, and Charlottesville was just like any other crime that happens in the United States, then there's not much for me to say to that. Literally, planned Nazis came from all over the United States to protest something in support of Nazism. It doesn't get much more important than that. Additionally, you haven't offered me any alternative counter standard or way to determine what constitutes a strong enough response. I think that the standard that I've articulated, that a response to a crisis of this nature should be timely, consistent, and precise, is an excellent standard. All you really talked about is how it doesn't really matter. If you want to have a debate about the topic, then offer me a coherent standard that allows us to actually have a debate about it. Give me a standard and offer me something. Say, okay, here's how we understand what strong enough means. But for you to pretend like Charlottesville was not a big deal when literally one of the largest protests for Nazism that we've seen in a long time just went down, I'm having a really, really hard time understanding how you believe that.
Okay, so once again, saying it's a national crisis doesn't make it a national crisis. I didn't say it wasn't important. I said it wasn't pertinent to the purview of the President of the United States to go into a local jurisdiction and overstep his boundaries when we have something called dualism, or we have federalism, where the states have jurisdiction to be able to take care of and enforce local laws and protect the people of their areas. If the law enforcement fails, that's not Trump's fault. And Trump coming out, the only reason that Trump would come out is if there was somehow a foreign force. And that's not the point. The point is this. Trump, I said, what is a strong enough response? The strong enough response is to do exactly what he said. Breaking the law, using violence, no matter what the motivation is wrong, and it's against the law, and it must come to an end, or you will be punished to the full extent of the law. Going out and virtue signaling by saying that this is the most evil group in the world doesn't change the fact that being the most evil group in the world doesn't change the fact that they still can't commit crimes without being punished. As soon as they commit crimes, they go to jail. The only reason this specific incident got attention was because the ACLU went on their side to the Nazis and the white supremacists, because they Antifa and other leftist organizations protested for them to have an event, or for them to get a permit to have a rally in the park. By stagnating this, yes, there was a lot of protesters and a lot more people that came. However, did you know that there's a national party for Nazis in the United States, and it's perfectly legal. People are allowed to join the Nazi party. People are allowed to join the KKK. They're perfectly legal organizations. They can't break the law, and that's the bottom line. And anything outside of that is outside of what the president's supposed to be doing.
Okay, on your last point, you talk about how Nazism is legal and the president can't break the law. First of all, it is not a winnable position for you in this debate round to say that the president should generically support the law and not respond to the crisis. You talk about how the president shouldn't, quote unquote, overstep his boundaries, and you talk about how Nazism is legal. I totally agree. Yeah, sure, you can be a Nazi. What you cannot do is run over people with your freaking car and murder them. So like, for you to be like, yeah, it's great and fine that Nazis are beating people up in the streets, and we should just enforce the law and like let the state do their thing is absolutely absurd. First of all, back my argument again about how this was a national crisis and it was a crisis that Trump should have responded to. The state government actually declared an emergency. They literally declared it a state emergency. So for you to be like, oh yeah, it's not a big deal. It's just some people that are doing some bad stuff is totally wrong and ignores the nuances of the position. People don't talk about and don't write about the stuff that happens in Chicago like they do about the stuff that happened in Charlottesville, because there's a unique difference between the two. One is a planned rally designed to violently support an awful ideology, and the other is crime that happens all the time. So for you to be like, it doesn't really matter and Trump shouldn't respond to it is absurd. On the point about how the president shouldn't overstep his boundaries, I never said that Trump should have gone in there and enacted federal laws that banned Nazism in the state of Virginia. We're talking about his response to it. Your position here is, well, the president should generically support the law. Great. Yeah, the president already does generically support the law. You articulating this idea that, well, the president shouldn't overstep his boundaries. He should, he shouldn't break the law and try to infringe on Virginia's rights is really, really ridiculous. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the president standing in solidarity with people who are victims of Nazis that just killed people in a state, and you're saying it's not a big deal and doesn't merit a response. That's absolutely absurd. Look, you have no case at this point in the debate round. You haven't offered me a counter standard. I've asked you twice to offer me a counter standard so we can have a debate about it, and you haven't done that. So the only argument you have right now is Charlottesville wasn't a big enough deal to warrant a response from Trump. And I'm saying that's an absurd position. Nobody's going to buy that. I've clearly demonstrated that it was something that was a national emergency, largest group of Nazis meeting in several decades, state of emergency declared by the state of Virginia, domestic terrorism literally happening. So I've given you a bunch of unique reasons why it's a big deal, and you haven't offered me anything to the contrary. And at this point in the debate round, you have no time to offer an alternative standard.
Is it my turn? Okay. You've proceeded to use a pathless appeal, use arguments that I never made, put every single argument that you said that I made. Let's start. Did I say, this is not a big deal? No. I said in comparative reflex to the amount of murders that happened, the amount of people that died, right, is not comparable in terms of Trump being able to come out and do something more than he did. He denounced violence. Violence is the standard. If anyone that initiates force against another individual is being punished, it needs to be punished by the folks in the law. You said they're not being, you just said that I made all these claims that I never said. Go back on the tape. Asserting that I don't think it's a big deal. I don't have any arguments. I don't have a standard. I don't know how many times you're going to say that I don't have a standard and then say I have a ridiculous argument. These aren't arguments. These are assertions. These are character. These are what's called ad hominem. You're distracting from what I'm saying to ridicule me. That doesn't give you credibility. That destroys your credibility when you play the tape back and you see that I didn't make those claims. So please, if you'd like to make this a little more cordial, I have no problem actually going down. But you'll notice that I never once will attack your character. I am attacking the arguments that you are making. Okay. With that aside, for people that can't differentiate between an ad hominem attack and an argument, your argument is that this is a national crisis. I said I challenge that premise that you are making to form your full argument. I don't believe this is a national crisis. I believe this is an incident of gang violence. Gang violence. You know what happens with gang violence? Do I think it's not a big deal? No, I think it's a very big deal. I think the gang violence is atrocious. It needs to go away. But it's violence. That's the problem. I don't understand where you don't get where the standard is. There's no because you're making the thing that everyone says it's a national crisis. Even you're saying now somebody could declare a state of emergency. 2 days. When was that? Oh, right. After the violence ended. At that point, what would you like the president to do to have his response strong enough? He can denounce violence and he can offer aid. Now, the only aid that he can offer him is finances, the military, and putting virtue signaling out on Twitter. None of those things are going to be helpful to actually to stop the violence. And that's the bottom line. Stop the violence. Stop the violence. The standard, stop the violence. Thank you, sir. Please refrain from the ad hominems so we can have a cordial argument.
I don't think I've made any ad hominems this time in the debate round. I don't think I've said or attacked your character in the debate round. I apologize if you think that I misrepresented arguments, but I don't recall a time where I attacked you. Could you give me an example?
What? Yeah, yes, I can. Okay, so let's do this, okay? You haven't made any argument whatsoever since we started the debate. Is that an intellectually honest claim? Have I not framed an argument whatsoever? Have I not made a claim, made a series of premises to lead up to that claim? Or have I just disregarded it and I said it doesn't matter? Is that an intellectually honest actually summary of my argument? Go ahead, tell me.
Okay, so are you saying I'm misrepresenting your arguments or attacking your character?
I'm not. No, I'm saying that you're intentionally misrepresenting my character as someone that doesn't care about Nazis, someone that apparently has no moral character, because I'm not willing to take the precedence of how important this crisis is. And for me to dismiss it as if it's just any crime on the street makes my moral character in question. And I'm saying that is an inherently fucking backwards ad hominem fallacy. And I appreciate it if you didn't bring that into this debate.
Okay, well, I apologize if you think that I maligned your character in any way. That was certainly not my intention. I was attacking your position, which is, I think, a very weak one, specifically that Trump's response should be proportionately strong and that Charlottesville didn't matter that much. That's your argument, right?
I never said Charlottesville didn't matter at all. I said if you compare it on a comparative force on violence, it needs to be stopped. We have kids that are dying every single day. Anytime that Nazis go out and kill somebody, it needs to be addressed the second that it comes up, and it needs to be squelched. It needs to be squelched. It needs to be squashed. It needs to be stopped. It's important to stop any sort of gang violence. And I said I don't care what crimes are paid attention to, but I do see that any crime that has innocent individuals killed for reasons that are not their own, I think that all those lives are equal.
Yeah, it's not my position that the lives are unequal at all. My position is that the situations are different specifically because they involve something known as Nazism and racism. There's lots of people that die due to violence in the United States all over the place. Murder is not like a controversial issue. Like, nobody's like, oh yeah, murder's chill. What is controversial is if the alt-right and Nazism and racism is okay. And so for Trump to wait for 2 days, let's go over my case for a second. It first took him 2 days to respond to it. And in that first response, he never called out racism once. He says, hate and evil and violence is bad. No, duh. Yes, clearly. That's an imprecise and inconsistent response, because guess what? He waffles on it later and he comes back and says, oh yeah, the whole thing about, I don't know, Nazism and racism and white supremacy, yeah, that's bad too. Sorry for not saying that in the first issue. Look, I'm not saying that Trump should like call out every time somebody gets in a car accident and dies. What I am saying is that issues of interest to the nation are issues of interest to the president. And that's not an ad populum fallacy. That's how democracy works. So for you to say, oh, it's not a national crisis, it's for me to appeal to the people caring about it is not an ad populum fallacy. It's me talking about how democracy works in the United States. The president is supposed to listen to what the people want. So look, here's how the debate comes down. This is very simple. The events that happened in Charlottesville were unique to other violent events that existed in the United States, which is why they got an abnormal amount of coverage from individuals and media outlets. Trump's response is way too late in the game. It is imprecise and vague, and it is not consistent. He waffles on it twice. So like, even if you want to say, oh, well, he doesn't have to offer a big response, I'll concede that to you. I'll concede your argument that proportionally, the media made a bigger deal out of it and didn't need to respond to it. The bottom line is this: even if you think the media made a bigger deal out of Charlottesville and gang violence are on an equivalent scale, his response was still not strong enough because of his lack of consistency, because of his lack of timeliness, and because of his lack of precision and vagueness on the issue. It's very simple for Trump. All he's got to do is be like, yo, Nazis are bad. And he doesn't do that. And he doesn't do that till way too late in the game, and after not doing it, and then he waffles after he does it again. His response is by definition not strong, certainly not strong enough. Even if you grant your argument, even if I grant you the argument that gang violence in Chicago is just like Charlottesville. If Trump is going to come out and respond to it, he shouldn't be like waffling on it. He shouldn't come out way late in the game, and he shouldn't be vague. He should be precise, he should be timely, and he should be consistent.
Okay. All right. I appreciate you forming an argument, forming a cogent argument here. Well, okay, so it's going to take this one step at a time. So now I'm not trying to compare that the gang violence here is the exact same as Chicago. I said the result and the way that it was formed, in the way that the two groups came face to face with the intention in the plan to go out and commit violence, with innocent lives being killed, is an incident of gang violence. I was going to point out that the reason that he said that all hate is bad, he said because establishing a motivation for the person that committed that killed the person, right, immediately gives attention to a group that needs to go away. The KKK has had rallies every single year in Charlottesville for 35 years. Now, I believe, okay, well, actually, if not Charlottesville in Virginia, excuse me, I do think I'm mistaken. In Virginia, there's a KKK rally. In fact, Robert Byrd, the Democratic senator, attended those rallies from the 70s on and prior. These people are problems, and they need to go away. Now, the best way to get these people to go away is not to antagonize them, right, and make them feel like they have to go and go underground, get in groups, and start forming resistance fronts. We need these people to go away by not acknowledge, like, when you have a bad argument, if they're not violent, you have the chance to correct them. But Trump coming out and saying, I don't care what the motivation is, just don't. It's like violence is wrong no matter what the cause is, and any asshole that comes out and kills another individual, regardless of the motivation, needs to stop, and these people need to go away. And I'm fine with that. Antifa is doing this all over the place to people that aren't Nazis. It's about time they stop doing that as well. Passing the mic.
The reason Charlottesville was consistent was not that one person died in a car accident. The reason Charlottesville was a big deal was because it was a centerpiece for racist, white supremacist Nazis to gather and protest violently. So for you to say Trump just has to condemn violence generically in response to Charlottesville, when the whole reason Charlottesville is of national interest is because of racism, is absurd and ridiculous. Look, you can be like, yeah, all Trump needs to do is condemn violence. Like, let's forget about, like, if not, I understand your argument. Your argument is, well, violence is violence and it needs to be condemned. The problem with Charlottesville is that violence was not just violence. It wasn't just a mean person running over somebody with their car because they were mad at them. It was white supremacist Nazi hatred, and Trump did not condemn it. His response is not strong enough. You haven't talked about the timeliness aspect, you haven't talked about the precision, and you haven't talked about the inconsistency in this debate. The only argument you have any ground on in this debate round is, well, Trump should have called out as violence and called all violence as bad. I agree Trump should call out all violence as bad. But you know what else he should do? Also call out all racism and Nazism and white supremacy as bad, which is the whole reason Charlottesville was of national importance and interest.
So if he did that, just you saying that everyone knows that violence is bad, I agree. But Antifa is doing it because they think that being a Nazi is justification for violence. Let me be clear. Violence is wrong. Nazism is also wrong. Saying that you said one without the other breeds controversy. One thing is objectively true all the time. Violence is always wrong.
Look, we can agree that violence is always wrong. It doesn't change the fact that Trump waffles on his response, waits 2 days to say it, and is vague and imprecise in his language and condemnation of it. I mean, it's very simple. Even if you agree that condemning all violence on both sides is okay, which I agree is fine, it doesn't satisfy the requirements for what Trump needed to do. The reason Charlottesville was important was not because violence happened, but because violence happened in the name of the KKK and Nazis.
Okay, so I don't think I said timeliness doesn't really matter because investigations need to occur before criminals can be punished. That's, again, rule under the law. Innocent until proven guilty. He has to wait before coming out with anything.
we aren't talking about what Trump does. We're talking about what Trump says. And it's clear that his response is imprecise, it's inconsistent,